Hello, everybody. My name's John Fletcher. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Cambridge Cryptographic from Cambridge, England. And I'm going to talk to you today about proof of deposit, which is, in fact, a governance proposal that we're proposing for Celo, and there's a forum post about it if you want to follow up and look at a bit more detail. My co-founder, Ying Chan, is here in the audience somewhere, and so, yeah, there he is. Please ask either him or me later on if you have any questions. So I'll just jump right into it. What is proof of deposit? It's a new primitive in DeFi. I think it's legit to call it a new primitive because it's really analogous to what central banks provide, which is a credit risk-free interest rate to those lucky enough to be able to make central bank deposits. And this is something that doesn't currently exist in blockchain. It's rather fundamental in finance more generally, and so you've got to wonder whether blockchain needs something like this, and we believe that it does indeed. When you hear interest rates are going up or going down, or the Fed is raising interest rates, what they're really talking about is whose interest rate is it? It's the interest rate that banks get if they deposit money with the Federal Reserve. And that's often called the risk-free rate. In fact, in economics, you might have heard that term, and that strictly speaking, it means credit risk-free rate because they're not really loaning it. It doesn't. There's no chance of default, and so it sort of sets the lower bound to any commercial rate for that reason. And in its main focus is its main reason for existing is to provide stability in the economy. So what is proof of deposit? It's an innovation which pays rewards on C-stables in your wallet. So these are just C-stables sitting in your wallet as they do at the moment. If you have proof of deposit, there's no additional risk. They still just sit in your wallet, but you get C-stable denominated interest. So money for free, in a sense. Who wouldn't love that? So some people seem to object to this on philosophical grounds that people shouldn't just get paid for doing nothing. The interesting part about this is that you're not paying them, gratuitously. It serves an important function in an economy, which is particularly to provide stability. So it increases demand for C-stables, as you can imagine. If suddenly you're getting paid a reward for just keeping your C-stables in the wallet, we would expect that to increase the demand for C-stables, at least somewhat. And we hope to make C-stables the go-to safe haven asset in market downturns. So the focus of this, really, on a technical level, is what happens when there's a crash. As you probably know, what happens in crypto when there's a crash is everybody liquidates into Tether, right? Because they want a stable unit of account. They don't want to lose their money if the crypto is crashing. And what stablecoin are you going to liquidate into? Well, just choose the most liquid one. Why not? There's not really any other criteria to judge it on. But in this case, you pay C-stables become far more attractive because they pay a return. And it's crucial under these circumstances that it is a credit risk-free return. You don't get the return in return for the risk of lending your C-stables out to someone which they might default and you might not get them back. And the reason why this is crucial is because nobody in the real economy, when there's a big market crash, a stock market crash, for example, liquidates, say, into, corporate bonds. And why is that? Because the corporate default risk skyrockets when the stock market is crashing. So it's not a risk-off trade. It's not a flight to safety. They liquidate into sovereign bonds. Why? Because they don't carry credit risk. And so their default risk is not skyrocketing. In fact, the sovereign generally becomes much stronger when there's a stock market crash because of the very high demand for sovereign bonds. Banks often become better capitalized too because retail investors liquidate their stocks and they put the money into banks. So this is the thing, the stock market crashes, but the banks become stronger and the sovereign which stands behind the banks becomes stronger. So in general, the economy overall remains strong. It can, this is what happens in developed economies like the UK or America. Somewhere like in less well-developed economies, you might have heard of the Asian financial crisis in 1998. It was caused by this so-called hot money problem. So people sold their stocks because there was a stock market crash, but the money completely left the country. It didn't go into local banks or banks, which are domiciled there. And so you have a banking crisis and a stock market crash at the same time, which is a real nightmare scenario. And this is basically what happens in crypto when there's a crash. So the money just leaves the system completely. So now what we're saying is if, you're worried about Celo could crash, you liquidate into C-stables, if you're worried Bitcoin can crash, you can liquidate into C stables as well. And so it has this buffering effect because when you buy C stables and the demand goes up, it pulls the price of Celo up because of the way arbitrage mechanism works. It creates demand for Celo. And so there's a much less chance of this sort of, the Celo might crash, the Bitcoin might crash, but at least you liquidate into something stable and something which is rock solid. It's going to keep its peg because the reserve remains well collateralized. Yeah, that was point 3. Another thing that this does is, it really kind of builds use cases outside of speculative use. I mean, people who can't afford to take risk with their money, at the moment, if they sit on C stables, I don't know, a C real, for example, or even CUSD, I mean, inflation's very high at the moment. It's the most regressive form of taxation. So there's nothing. They're not getting any interest rates. So there is no hedge against inflation there. In this case, depositors could earn a reward which would offset the effect of inflation. And for institutional entrants, I mean, you might know that things like bonds, especially sovereign bonds, are important components of diversified portfolios. So you have the primitives that are required to build portfolios by the standard, modern portfolio theory, and that's something which is of interest to institutions. 5, I didn't want to make too much of this, but the thing is, at the end of the day, we're asking Celo validators to divert some rewards, which is its market rate, an amount of their choosing, towards C stable holders. And why would they do that? Well, they do that because Celo will increase in value due to the increased demand for C stables. And we can do quite a simple calculation to see how that happens. And it seems a bit sort of high, but we tried to be as conservative as we possibly could, and it still came out with an almost unbelievably high number, and I'll explain why in a minute. So we have an example here. We just use CUSD rather than C stables in general. It works for all C stables, by the way. 13 million Celo tokens in block rewards per year, about $40 million US. If we say if half of these rewards were diverted to C stable holders or CUSD holders, it would be about 2% of the APY from the validators would be going elsewhere. The market cap of the CUSD at the moment is about 90 million. So that 20 million, that half of their rewards that they're getting, would mean about a 22.2% deposit rewards rate. And I remind you, this does not require them to relinquish custody of their C stables. It doesn't carry credit risk. So that would be a ludicrously high rate. So what happens when you're offering this rate? More CUSD holders come in because it's an attractive rate, and the interest rate will go down because it has to be divided between more deposits. Let's say it goes down to about 5%. That's attractive for a return for which you don't take credit risk. That means that you get about approximate quadrupling of the CUSD market cap, which we've seen is commensurate with approximate quadrupling of the Celo market cap. So the interesting thing about this, again, we've just gone through one cycle, but what happens there is that you see the Celo market cap goes up and quadrupling, but then the rewards are denominated largely in Celo. So in fact, the amount of money which is available for this interest rate also increases. So then you will get a virtuous cycle whereby the market cap of Celo increases, the deposit rewards rate increases because it's largely denominated in Celo, and then the demand for CUSD deposits increases, of course, because there's more rewards, and the market cap of CUSD goes up, and it in fact loops round. So it might seem a bit odd, but this is something which is only available to protocols with their own native stablecoin, which is very few, in fact. Celo is an example, Terra is another example. There aren't many who've really figured out that this is the way to build a crypto protocol, and I believe it is, have a native stablecoin. And if you do this, the reason why it works so well and the reason why it's so powerful is because a relatively small return is a really big deal for somebody who's holding a stablecoin and is not having to lend that stablecoin out in return for it. If you imagine making a decision as to what protocol you're going to invest in, you're going to buy some algo tokens, any Celo tokens. Nobody says I'm going to buy algo tokens because they pay like 7% higher staking reward, or 7% rather than 5%, because then they would be saying I thought Celo over the next year is going to do 2% better than Algo, and because, that tips the balance because they're offering me 4% better. Nobody can be that accurate, right? I mean, over 1 year, the Celo price could be, if there's a wider market collapse, 30 cents, maybe up to $30 if it takes off. So that's a 100x variation. 2% here or there does not affect a person's decision as to which protocol token to invest in, but it does affect their decision as to which stablecoin to invest in, because it's very significant. The same amount of money is much more significant for a stable token than it is for a volatile token. So how does proof of deposit work? Again, I would encourage you to go to the forum. We have some sort of equations, even a bit more detail there. But at a high level, our innovation requires validators to compete for C-stable deposits. So at the moment, they're sort of trying to get attention of Celo holders. They want them to vote for them. Now they'll be trying to get attention of Celo holders and C-stable deposit holders. And they want the C-stable deposit holder to say, okay, I nominally assign or point towards this validator. If they get more C-stable holders to point towards them, they get higher rewards, and that's why they're incentivized to sort of compete for these guys. So now the rewards are a function of not only how much sort of Celo you have attracted towards you or assigned towards you, but also how many C-stables you do. The mechanism is designed to give the return at a market rate, and this is in fact crucial because not having incentives or rewards on stable coins at a market rate is why previous attempts of this had failed. It's a little bit subtle. Something like MakerDAO had a version of this called the DAI savings rate, and it was voted down to 0 pretty quickly. And the reason is something called time inconsistency, which I recommend that you look up. And in fact, it's the same reason why interest rates trend down over long time scales, like the Fed's funds rate, for example. You look over the last 40 or 50 years, it goes down to 0. And agents will always prefer lower and lower interest rates. And so if you just ask them what interest rates they want, they'll generally just say lower and lower. That's why you can't vote on the interest rate. It has to be market determined. Otherwise, it will simply go to 0 over some time scale. And here at the bottom just shows where our invention fits in. We have, this is the current cycle where you get block rewards and validators offer these block rewards to Celo holders. Now validators are going to be offering a portion of these block rewards, however much they deem, the market rate, to both Celo holders and holders of C-stables. We've just said CUSD here, but it's C-stables. It works for all of them at the same time. So another notable thing, we claim, is that this solves an outstanding problem in macroeconomics more generally. It was always a bit of a mystery as to how the central bank rate seems like a bit of an artificial thing because it's not set by the market, it's set by the Monetary Policy Committee, typically. And nobody had ever figured out before how to have set the central bank rate. I said a credit risk-free rate at a market rate. And the reason is it's almost obvious, in fact, because if I were to give some money to you, if you're not allowed to then lend it out and do something with it, I don't know, make an investment or put it in your business, why would you ever offer me a return for it? Credit risk-free interest rates are not things that can be done on a market like on a commercial basis, so they have to be offered by the central bank for reasons of stability. Now there's another way to get one, and this can be market determined, and it requires a decentralized blockchain. That's not to say there's more work to be done. Just because you have an interest rate, it doesn't mean it's the one that's most conducive to economic growth or healthy economic growth, or it gives you a counter-cyclical interest rate. So there's a lot more to it than that, but it's still a world first to have a market-determined risk-free rate. And it has this sort of anti-fragile property whereby in Celo, for example, if the thing drops, the more people liquidate into C-stables, rather than putting strain on the system, it in fact becomes stronger the more people decide to sort of preferentially liquidate into C-stables. That was something I forgot to say. So yeah, because this is a little bit novel, we've captured the attention of a few of these guys, which we're currently explaining the mechanism to, and we're also taking advice from some of the Celo guys, most notably Zeke over there, about how to potentially package this in a way that a central bank could be interested in. That's it. Any questions? What's 1:30? Oh yeah, 1:30 tomorrow we're going to have a workshop. So if anybody, this is pretty quick talk, of course, so we can go into more depth if you guys are interested. In one of the side rooms, I guess it will be. Yep. That's it. Oh yes, please.
Sorry. Yeah, there's a microphone.
Hi, I'm Tongi with Maya Financial. When you talk about packaging this for central banks, is the hope that a central bank would then buy C-stable, or instead of creating their own central bank digital currencies?
I think the short answer to that is no. It's going to be the CBDC sort of vision of this is a lot more complicated than what we've just presented, which we believe will be a benefit to Celo. I guess the reason why it's more complicated is that because there's all sorts of things like I guess there's issues with being able to see where money is going in countries, and this only works with a decentralized blockchain. It would be something that we would envisage more or less commercial banks would hold things like C-stables as capital reserves, so they wouldn't really move around as money. There'd be M2 money built on top of that. So I think the short answer is no, and it also wouldn't work until the sort of Celo value were bootstrapped. Like the Celo ecosystem were in a lot more of a mature state than it is now. It's got a lot of growing to do. So it would really only be a sort of exploratory thing about the kind of cool thing that you could do in the future when Celo was really big enough to handle it. So yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, so we shouldn't expect an announcement that the US Fed is necessarily buying $1 trillion.
Yeah, you might have to wait till the next conference for that one, I'm afraid. Good question. Oh, yes.
Hello, I'm Nadeem. I work for Celo.
Hi.
Hi. And I have one question, and it's mainly about the credit risk, because I don't think C-stables are credit risk-free. This is the first thing, and I think this makes a huge difference. And I also think that they have wrong-way risk, because if the value of Celo goes down, then the probability of default increases for these C-stables.
Yep.
So I think in a downturn scenario, I don't think a rational investor would move to C-stable.
Yep.
And the second thing is, I think like this increase of supply that you are creating,
yep.
If people pick up on this, it's a very loosely embedded supply, and it will be supply that will immediately be coming back, which will potentially cause a death spiral. Because like if it is liquidity that is bound in business or in transactions, then it has a purpose and it will not flow back. But this liquidity that just sits in the wallet, it will come back as soon as it feels threat. And
threatened by maybe depegging or some kind of event.
By depegging or
yep.
risk of default, and then
yep.
it will come back, and it will even potentially like the amount that is in the first place, like it's beneficial. It grows like 4 times the supply. This will be increasing the death spiral speed, I think.
Right. So to your first question, I think it might be a matter of definitions. The credit risk. So we would think of depegging risk as something separate from credit risk, the way that we define it. So you would still have the same number of C-stables. They might be, if they depeg, they'd be worth less each. So that was how we defined not losing.
Yes, I mean, the problem that I see is there's collateral. And if the collateral value goes down,
yep.
then you have a recovery, and like it will not be 1 USD for 1 CUSD.
Yep.
And if the collateral goes down really badly, it will be a default. I mean,
yep.
default is like.
Yep. So the hope is that of course, we're trying to make C-stables more attractive as a safe haven asset. And this would be if people were to liquidate into C-stables rather than Tether, it would make the unpegging risk a lot less. So this is something which you need to incentivize. I think it's wise to incentivize. Rather than the hot money problem, it just goes out into Tether and completely leaves the system.
Yeah, but I really think like if if it should really be about protection against really a market crisis, like if the people are rational, they will not go to C-stables because they know that the collateral that is backing the C-stable will also be affected by the downturn.
Yeah. So, but also, if they were to liquidate into C-stables, that would create a push up of the, and that would buffer the collateral. So those two things would oppose one another. I mean, so you're kind of thinking like, what is everybody else going to do in some sense? Like, if everybody else is going to do that too, it's the risk is very low. At the end of the day, I think that unless you find some way to get people to liquidate into C-stables, that'd be a very attractive thing to do. The system, it's like a ticking time bomb anyway. Because it's hot money, it goes completely out of the system, and
I mean, what you have seen in financial markets so far, this is not going to happen. I mean, like if we had some kind of like companies defaulting, then it activates a spiral. People are moving out, the prices of the CDS go up, so it's just going on. Like.
So companies defaulting, what's...
Yeah, I mean, what we had in the financial crisis, companies' probability of default was increasing.
Yep.
People got scared.
Yep.
The prices of the CDS were skyrocketing.
Yes.
Skyrocketing,
Yes.
and then it increased the pressure on the probability of default and so on. Like it
Yes.
was a spiral.
Yes.
And I have the feeling that people tend rather towards the spiral than out of it. So this is my concern.
In this case, you're right. There's the probability of default, but this would be analogous to a sovereign bond. So the thing is that the financial crisis would have been a lot worse if it hadn't been for the fact that the government could borrow incredibly cheaply during the financial crisis because everybody liquidated into sovereign bonds, right? Otherwise, if they'd had something like the Asian financial crisis, it would have been Armageddon because the government couldn't backstop the banks anymore. So you have to find some way, an analogy to a sovereign bond, I believe. They're going to liquidate into that. Otherwise, it's hot money. It leaves the system completely, and it will collapse because you get two things. You get depegging at the same time as a fall in value of the collateral. So, I mean, what's the other way that you get people to liquidate preferentially into C-stables? If you just say, oh, that's impossible, well, it's never going to happen, then basically it's the Asian financial crisis. We can't get people to sell stocks and put the money in domestic banks. So basically it's a ticking time bomb. Yeah. That's what I would say. So, I mean, yeah, we can continue this debate. It's an excellent questions, though. Excellent questions. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.